Welcome to another episode of Great War Story. This one I've called Unlikely Hero, the man who saved my grandfather's life, and the pictures you see are my grandfather. They are from a before and after surgery photos. These were taken at the hospital before surgery, and there's two others that follow up. I have recorded this episode before. When I first started this YouTube channel, it was my second ever episode, and last time I checked only 68 people had watched it, I guess because it's old and they don't come up. And I had a pretty bad microphone too, so the sound quality was pretty poor. And since I think it's a pretty good story and I wanted to share it with more people, I thought I would re-record it with a better mic and see if I can get more than 68 people watching it. So the subtitle is Fate, Funerals and Broken Ankles. And there's what my grandfather looked like on the right before his wound, when he was still in the Army Service Corps. You can see on his sleeve there is a single stripe that's a wound stripe, similar to, say, an American Purple Heart. But after this awful facial wound, he was then entitled to a second wound stripe, and you can see the dates there, 18th of October, the before surgery shots, and 20th of December, the after surgery shots. Now, I've often thought it would be really cool if there could be a mini-series, maybe, like a 6 or 8 parter that followed my grandfather's life and times from when he signed up for war in August of 1914 all the way through to, when he got back to New Zealand in 1919. Now, if you're going to make some kind of movie or TV series, you need an opening, something that leads you into the story. So, for example, Saving Private Ryan opens with this scene where you have this old man who's visiting a war cemetery and he's broken up about all the friends he lost and all of those kind of things, and that then leads into the reminiscence and the story that is told about, how Private Ryan was saved. And the beauty of it is, I don't even have to make up an opening scene like this because I already know what it has to be. So bear with me while I share this story. So it starts with the marriage of my parents in July of 1960 in Wellington, New Zealand at St. John's Presbyterian Church. And there's various different footage of the wedding. And you can see my World War I grandfather there. And if you look closely, you can see the really significant fold that is in his cheek, although, frankly, some of the other photos show it more visibly. And this photo in particular is important because it reveals something about how my parents met. On the right, behind my mother, there's a bunch of girls from the Girls Brigade, and behind my father, there's a bunch of boys from the Boys Brigade. And they were both adult officers, workers with these organizations, and it was through them that they met. And in fact, Boys Brigade was what led my Welsh father to move to New Zealand in the first place. He actually went out as a representative of Wales for the Boys Brigade to an international camp being held in New Zealand. So, yeah, those are photos I took when I was in Cardiff, those photos in the middle. And he got a job with the Boys Brigade, so he wasn't just at this point a volunteer helper, he was actually working full-time. But for this job, he moved from Wellington, where he met my mother, up to Auckland to start this new job working in the Boys Brigade office. And my grandfather had just lost his wife, my grandmother. I never met her. She died in 1960 of kidney failure. In fact, it was just before Wellington Hospital got their first dialysis machine, which possibly could have helped her, but sadly she passed away young. And so my grandfather was kind of at a loss. His last child had just got married and moved to Auckland, and so he thought, well, what am I going to do? I'll help them out by driving my car to Auckland and I'll take up a bunch of their wedding presents for them. So that's what he did. Now, when he was in Auckland, Dad had to attend a memorial service for a Boys Brigade officer, a company captain, who had just passed away. So Dad had never met the man because he had only moved to Auckland and started the job there, but he was sort of required as part of his job to go to this big memorial service. And Granddad, being there on his own, not wanting to just hang around the house, said, well, I might as well go along with you. So my newly married parents and my grandfather, the World War I veteran, went to this memorial service at Greenlane Presbyterian Church. And the memorial service was for this fellow, James Thomas Smallbone. Now what's interesting, and what Granddad didn't yet realise, was that he was actually in Granddad's company of the New Zealand Machine Gun Battalion in World War I. But as Granddad sat in the service, it gradually dawned on him that this JT, or James Thomas Smallbone, was actually the Jimmy Smallbone that he had known when they were both in the Machine Gunners in 1917, 1918. And by the way, this is a black and white photo. And I've often wondered if that machine gunner on the left, well, the left from their point of view, I should say, the right from our point of view, could even potentially be my grandfather. He has a quite similar profile. Obviously, you can't see his face very well, but it's similar enough, and I know that this photo was taken in 1918 when my grandfather was with the machine gunners, so I can't prove it, but it's actually possible that one of those men could be my grandfather. And I just want to mention this guy on his Twitter account, Doug, who is the one who colorized it. He does an amazing job. So if you excuse me, I get these sneezing fits. He does this amazing job of colorizing photos, and you can see there that he will help you colorize your photos. So I thought I'd give him some advertising since I was using one of his images. Now, as Granddad was in this service, listening and saying, I know this man. He's the one, when I was shot through the face, got me back to the aid station, the dressing station. So when Granddad suffered that terrible wound to the face while they were involved in the assault on the village of Ladane on October the 8th, 1918, it was Jimmy Smallbone who saved him. Now this is what Granddad, who almost never talked about World War I, he was one of those veterans who didn't like to share his experiences, he opened up for the first time, and this is in the TV show, would be how he'd say, well, let me tell you how I knew Jimmy Smallbone, and then you'd go into the recollection of his experiences in World War I. And this is what Granddad said about Jimmy Smallbone. He was a short little Cockney guy who jumped ship in New Zealand. He was a kitchen hand and a ne'er-do-well, always getting into trouble, never thought he'd amount to anything. So the fact that he then got heavily involved with the Boys Brigade and helped many boys, grow up and have a good experience in their youth, and being a really, major upstanding member of the community who was now having a big memorial service, came as quite a surprise to Granddad. And the key point, as I said, he saved Granddad's life and dragged him back to safety. Now, can we check any of these details? Well, one time after I'd been spending so much time reading and interpreting my grandfather's military file, my own father said to me, I wonder if you could find Jimmy Smallbone's military file. And using the New Zealand government archives, I did. And, Smallbone's not exactly the most common name, so it didn't take me long to find James Thomas Smallbone and check his details. So he was a short little guy, was he? Well, 5'2", I think that meets the definition of being short, even with their lower average heights back in World War I. Was he a Cockney? Well, I can't say for sure he was a Cockney, but he was born in London, which at least is in the right general area. He jumped ship in New Zealand. Well, his former occupation before signing up in World War I was listed as a seaman with the Union Steamship Company. So, not exactly proof, but it certainly seems to match. He was a kitchen hand. Well, in fact, he was appointed as company cook, and well, it would make sense before he was appointed as company cook that he could have been a kitchen hand. And he was a ne'er-do-well, always getting into trouble. Well, his conduct sheet certainly has a reasonable number of problems, nothing terribly serious, And most of the punishments you can see there: fined 2 days' pay, fined 3 days' pay, fined 6 days confined to barracks. 6 days' pay, 3 days' pay. I mean, nothing extremely severe, but I think that's close enough to say that he tended to get in trouble. It's more often than most write-ups I've seen in people's conduct sheets. And the last one, the date when he was appointed company cook. So Granddad was shot through the face on the 8th of October 1918. 2 days later, Smallbone gets promotion. Now, if he is a troublesome, guy who's always getting in trouble, that's not the kind of person the army tends to give a medal to. But they might very well reward him with a promotion that would come with a pay rise. So even the date of his appointment as company cook, I think, does seem to align with Granddad's story of how Smallbone saved his life. Now, I consider it practically a miracle that I was able to find a photo of Smallbone, because many of these people I research online, there's no photos to be had. I mean, if you're lucky, somebody's uploaded something somewhere, but in the case of Smallbone, nope, there's nothing online. But it was through a personal connection. This guy on the left, the taller, younger man, is an old family friend, John Page, and he was a boy in Smallbone's Boys Brigade company, and Smallbone attended his 21st birthday party, John Page's birthday party, that is, and Mr. Page said he still had a photo of him, and he managed to dig it out and let me take a copy of it. And you can see there, well, John Page is shorter than I am, and I'm not, I'm about 5'9", 5'10", something like this. And Smallbone, well, I guess he had shrunk even more through age. And Mr. Page said they always knew him as JT, James Thomas Smallbone. And he said, well, he was married and he cared for his sick wife. He remembered that, but he said, I don't think he had any children. But again, all sorts of things you can learn from somebody's military file. So you can see there that he had married Mabel Elizabeth Hilditch in Hamilton, New Zealand in 1907. And in fact, they did have a child. But you'll notice the date of birth. Initially, it was written as 1908, as if it was his child. But later it's corrected to 1902. And the last name has been written in Hilditch. In other words, Mabel already had a child before they got married, and, well, I guess Smallbone helped raise this boy, his stepson. And here we have another nice photo of New Zealand machine gunners. This is when the New Zealand Prime Minister Massey and the Deputy Prime Minister Ward visited the boys in France in 1918. Now, of course, we've already listed the fact that Smallbone worked with the cook, so I looked around and I found a nice photo of some New Zealand cookers from 1918, a little bit after Granddad was taken out. 29th of October 1918, New Zealand Army Service Corps soldiers working at field cookers to prepare a meal for the New Zealand troops in the field. Well, the guys have got to eat, don't they? And the story of the cook hasn't ended yet. Because part of the way I've tried to research my grandfather's story is to try to think of every different angle with which to investigate it. Now, a beautiful thing, if you have a New Zealander who was wounded in the war, is to find him in the casualty lists. They published these comprehensive lists of everybody who was wounded, or killed for that matter, and they do it by unit. So I knew that Granddad was in the machine gunners, so I was able to pull up the machine gunners and look down the list, and sure enough, there's my grandfather, service number 5/77, Fowler RB. Now, the date reported was the 23rd of October. Now, I know from his military file that he was wounded on the 8th of October, so that gave me something to look for. I thought, maybe if I pull the military files of the other men who were wounded on the same day as him, I might learn some interesting details. So I basically thought, well, okay, it's 15 days after he was wounded that the wounds reported, so I'm going to look up all of these machine gunners whose wounds are reported on the 22nd, 23rd, or 24th of October. That should get me close to it, and perhaps I'll find other men who were wounded in the same battle. Oh yes, the other detail you'll see listed next to his name is that he was a main body man. You see, the vast majority of people in this list are listed as, part of the 5th Reinforcements or the 34th Reinforcements or the 33rd Reinforcements and so on and so on. There's not many others who are listed as main body. In fact, on this page, I think I only see one. Now, a main body man was somebody who signed up right at the beginning and went out with the main body. This is that group of 10,000 men who were on that convoy that left New Zealand in October of 1914. And everybody, when they saw a service number like that, 5/77, would know that Granddad had been in ever since the beginning. Now, back to the casualty lists. I was able to identify 39 other men who were reported about the same time. So that took quite a long time digging through. And I found, actually more than one that was really, really interesting. But we're going to stick with one of my discoveries out of those 39. Because it was George Alfred Symons, the company cook for the Wellington Company of the New Zealand Machine Gun Battalion. Now remember that Smallbone had been promoted to company cook. Well, I got the story of why there was a vacancy for Smallbone in the first place. And then got to learn about one of my grandfather's other comrades, the man who cooked their meals. So an important man, I think, for everybody. He was George Alfred Symons, service number 20260, and it was always nice to see did they survive World War I, and he did indeed. He died in 1961. And this picture of the cooks at work on the right was actually made by a man who served with the machine gunners. So for all I know, one of these men might very well be George Symons. Sadly, I was not able to locate a photo of Symons, so I have no way of knowing, but, well, it may well be the case that one of those men in this picture is Symons. And he had been company cook ever since the 31st of March 1917, and he was wounded in action one day after Granddad. Granddad got shot through the face on the 8th, Symons got hit on the 9th. And then you can see he was admitted to the CCS, the Casualty Clearing Station, on the 10th of October, gunshot wound, ankle right. Now let me tell you, ankle wounds are not pretty. They can be debilitating for a long time. That is what happened to my foot after I had a very minor break. Such a stupid thing. I walked off a curb outside a supermarket, twisted my ankle badly, and the bone was sort of pulled away, and apparently what can happen is the ligament that's attached to the bone can be pulled away and take some of the bone with it. So it wasn't even a proper break. It was a stupid thing, some damage to the outside of the bone, but God, that left me hobbling for a long, long time and pain for a couple of years. So I can hate to think what it would have been like to actually have your bone broken by a bullet. Now, when I went back through George Symons and the story of his ankle, it was actually, well, not tragic exactly, but not comic either, because this poor right ankle of his was kind of cursed, because he had already had an injury with it in late 1917. In fact, it said right ankle. I think that actually was a mistake. I think both times it was to his left ankle. So you can see here, nature and location of injury, sprain, left ankle. And then number 3 on this form, short statement of the circumstances. While on duty carrying a boiler over icy ground, he slipped and sprained his ankle. Signed statement by 21781, Private Brooklebank, E, attached. So there has to be a witness statement and that he sprained his ankle on Christmas Eve. Commanding officer's opinion. Was it in performance of his duty? Yes. Was he to blame? No. Was any other person to blame? No. And this is signed by his captain, Captain Chater. And the opinion of the military police, they rule it as accidental. Soldier was in execution of his duty, no action. So why the big deal? Well, let's keep going and look at some of the things that are on the witness statements. Here's what Symons himself wrote. While on duty on the morning of the 24th of December 1917, I was walking along the frosty ground where I slipped and fell, injuring my left ankle, which had previously been sprained some days before. Noted this 26th day of December 1917. And here's Brocklebank's witness statement. On the morning of the 24th of December 1917, I was carrying a copper into the cookhouse, assisted by 20260 Private G.A. Symons, when he slipped on some ice and fell, spraining his ankle. Well, you've all heard the stories of soldiers who deliberately shoot themselves in the foot, so word had gone around that any injuries of this nature, say an injury to a foot or an ankle, were to be inspected with the, well, at least strong suspicion that it might not be a genuine accident, that this soldier might be malingering and trying to get out of duty, almost as bad as, deserting. Not quite as bad, but pretty bad. So therefore, you can now see why it was so important to have these rulings. Was it in performance of his duty? Yes, it was. Was he to blame? No, he wasn't. It was accidental. This is why so many people have to get involved over something that otherwise is just a simple injury when you slip on some ice and sprain your ankle. And you can see here on the military form it said gunshot wound ankle right. But as I said to you a little earlier, that was actually a mistake. It was his left, because when you dig deeper in his military file, you see the medical documents which give considerably more detail. Gunshot wound of left leg with a comminuted fracture of the tibia, wound excised, counter drainage, no foreign bodies removed, so there was no shrapnel stuck in it. On admission here, dirty discharging wound on inner aspect of left ankle, movement at ankle joint limited, some edema of foot. X-ray report, comminuted fracture lower end of tibia with displacement to inwards of lower fragments, blah, blah, blah. So you can see what the tibia is there. And in my case, it was when the fibula was pulled away by me twisting my ankle, and the ligament attached to the tibia pulled away with it, taking, well, some of the bone with it. In this case, a much more serious injury. I had to look it up to find out what kind of fracture this is. A comminuted fracture is one where it's broken in multiple places. Nasty thing to have happen to your ankle. And this is where I dug down through the battalion routine orders to get why they were paying so much attention to this kind of thing. So battalion routine orders written by Lieutenant Colonel D.B. Blair of the New Zealand Machine Gunners. 1st of May 1918. Self-inflicted and accidental wounds. The attention of all officers is drawn to the instructions printed on the back of AFW 3428 issued with battalion orders. These instructions must be fully complied with. An AFW 3428 must be rendered immediately in every case of self-inflicted wounds, SIW, or accidental injuries. The instructions in paragraph 3 will be strictly adhered to. And then again in a later series of orders, self-inflicted injuries. In future, where there is reason to suppose that a soldier is suffering from the effects of gas through carelessness, disobedience of orders, culpable negligence, or drinking or washing in water knowing it to be contaminated, or in contravention of orders, the case will be investigated and AFW 3428 rendered. Well, these are the forms they had to fill out for poor Symons with his sprained ankle. And while I was researching this topic, I found that they actually made men who were ruled to have self-inflicted wounds wear an armband of shame, the SIW, self-inflicted wound armband of shame. So when they were in the hospital, everybody would know that they were a coward trying to get out of combat and not suffering a legitimate injury. It was also interesting to know that they weren't entirely heartless, mind you, because elsewhere it says about the unfit men. Company commanders will render to battalion orderly room by 6 p.m. 13th of this month a return showing the names and particulars of all men who are unfit for trench service with a view to having them classified. So if you do have men with, trench foot or suffering from other problems, well, we are willing to take them out of the front line and let them have a chance to recover. But not without caution. Sick parade. All men who parade sick and are excused duty, also light duty men, become automatically confined to barracks, and as such will not leave the camp without permission of their company commanders. So yes, we will take them out of the line, and we will give them a chance to recover, but you're automatically confined to barracks. It's not a holiday. You can't go off to the estaminet and have a drink or anything like that. But within reason, we will allow you out of the front line if you are genuinely suffering a malady. On the other hand, SIW, true shame indeed. And that's all I have for you. So I'm going to say good evening to you, and I hope that more than 68 people watch my re-recording of it. Thank you for your time.